And I don't know whose idea it was for me to start taking piano lessons. For years, I blamed my mother.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Carganilla Online Variety Entertainment Podcast. Here's your host, Paul Carganilla.
Hello and welcome to COVE. This is the show in which we aim to entertain and inspire our podcast listeners and YouTube viewers through a variety of audible art forms, including music, storytelling, special guest interviews, and more. I'm your host, Paul Carganilla, and in today's episode, I'm thrilled to spend some time with a friend that we met for the first time last episode, David Benjamin, who hosts his very own classical piano show here on the Vaudacity YouTube network every other Tuesday. And the theme for the episode is classic and classical. But before we bring David in, I'd like to bring in my show manager for this episode, producer Craig Jackman.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here and good to see you, Paul.
Great to see you and welcome. We've done a few shows this week, so it's great to be. I feel like I'm seeing you regularly, and that feels good.
Yes. Oh, very, very good. Especially after, I know there was that break where I was on vacation on a cruise and also going to New York, which was an incredible experience.
Yeah.
But I got to say, it's always nice to come back home and get back into the regular activities.
There is no place like home and doing what you love and
Yes.
being joined by, surrounded by people that you love to be surrounded by.
Absolutely.
All
Or should I
right.
say, as the Disney person would say, absolutely, positively.
Yes. Not confusing at all.
Well, you know that was from Oliver and Company.
Yeah, that is a classic Disney film.
Yes.
A classic. And the theme, as I mentioned, for today is classic and classical. We're going to talk about this because there is a difference I discovered today between classic and classical. While they both stem from the same root word of class, they mean different things. And Craig is going to help me out to sort out these definitions. Craig, can you please, let's start with classic. Let's define classic, if you will.
Okay. Classic is defined in several ways. Now, it's an adjective and it's a noun.
Okay.
So, yeah, let's go with the adjective first. The adjective, there's two definitions as an adjective. Classic is judged over a period of time to be of the highest quality and outstanding of its kind, like a classic novel.
Okay.
And the second one is remarkably and instructively typical. Hamlet is a classic example of a tragedy.
Got it.
So those are the two definitions as classic is an adjective. As a noun, there's also two definitions. The first one, a work of art of recognized and established value. In other words, his books have become classics.
Like Oliver and Company is a classic.
A classic Disney film, correct.
Now, I said a noun and you said an adjective.
Okay, yes. Interchanging the two.
Okay. Yes.
All right. Then the second definition of a classic as a noun is a school subject that involves the study of ancient Greek and Latin literature, philosophy, and history.
Got it. So that Greek and Latin literature and philosophy thing comes back in the definition. There are three definitions of classical. It's used as an adjective, meaning of or relating to the ancient Greek and Roman world, and especially to its literature, art, architecture, or ideals. That's the first definition of classical. The second is relating to the first significant period of an area of study. Makes sense. And third is of or relating to music of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, characterized by an emphasis or emphasis on balance, clarity, and moderation. And I think that's more of the classical we're going to be experiencing this evening. Mm-hmm. All right. So I know like you have a history in radio, as we discussed in the first episode of this podcast. And you mentioned to me in Soundcheck today that your first job was at a classic rock radio station.
Correct. Up in Madeira, we had a station. It was Cosmic FM.
Do I dare ask you for the definition of classic rock?
Well, I have my own definition, but I do like what Wikipedia shares in the description of it. Wikipedia says it's classic rock is a radio format that developed from the album-oriented rock format in the early 1980s. Album-oriented rock, think of like Led Zeppelin, like Foreigner, those kinds of artists. And in the United States, it comprises rock music ranging from, I just kind of brought that up, mid-60s through the mid-1990s, primarily focusing on commercially successful blues, rock, and hard rock popularized in the 1970s AOR format.
Album-oriented
AOR meaning,
rock.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
All right. Well, here on this episode, we are going to explore classic rock and classical music. I'm going to play a classic rock tune to start us off, and Craig's going to tell you all about it.
Yeah, and this is actually kind of one of my favorite groups from that era. It was inspired by the country song Ghost Riders in the Sky by Stan Jones. This particular version of the song evolved out of a jam session as the band was playing that song. And what's interesting is it was the last song Jim Morrison ever recorded. And it was released in 1971, shortly before his death. The song went to number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100, and in 2010, this particular song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame as a recording of, quote, lasting, qualitative, or historical significance, end quote. This is The Doors, Riders on the Storm, as sung by Paul Carganilla.
Thank you, Craig. My version will be without the rock. Hopefully it's still classic enough. Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out on loan. Riders on the storm, there's a killer on the road, his brain is squirming like a toad. Take a long holiday, let your children play. If you give this man a ride, sweet memories will die. Killer on the road. Girl, you gotta love your man. Girl, you gotta love your man. Take him by the hand, make him understand. The world on you depends, our life will never end. Gotta love your man. Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out on loan. Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Riders on the storm. riders on the storm.
That was nice.
Thanks, Craig.
I think classic rock would approve of that.
Okay. There's no lengthy guitar solos or keyboard solos in there, but it's a nice little unplugged version of the classic rock tune for you. All right. Well, I think it's time to bring in our special guest for this episode of Carganilla Online Variety Entertainment Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming David Benjamin.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, buddy. Thanks for jumping on.
Hey,
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we did your everything anyone could possibly know about you in 60 seconds or less last episode. So I
think I rattled off something semi-coherent.
You did a great job. And I think that since we already, if anybody needs to know everything about David Benjamin in 60 seconds or less, go back and listen to the previous episode. And but he did mention a little bit he touched on, because he only had a minute, his background in piano and music. And I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more before we hear him play some tunes for us. And so, David, reeling it all the way back and jogging our memory for if we can't remember the last episode, when did you begin your journey, your musical journey?
Musical journey itself, sometime prior to the age of 10. I started playing piano when I was about 10 years old. I remember my parents put me in a rhythm class, drums, percussion instruments, things like that. And that was, as far as what I remember, my first introduction to the world of music. And my teacher in that class apparently didn't think I was going to amount to much. And here we are. You know, when I was that age, I was playing soccer and stuff too. And I eventually hit a point when I was around 10 years old, I wanted to quit soccer. And my mom said, okay, well, you have to do something else outside of school if you want to quit soccer. It's fine if you do, but you got to do something else. And I don't know whose idea it was for me to start taking piano lessons. For years, I blamed my mother. But somebody said, how about piano lessons? And I don't know how enthused I was about it, but I kind of went along with it. And there was a period of time, when I was in junior high, I really wanted to quit. And my mom gave me the same choice. If you can quit, that's fine, but do something else outside of school. And by that point, I was getting kind of lazy, so I didn't quit. And I'm really glad now, because I ended up majoring in the subject. And yeah, I've played, who knows how many hours of piano over my life. It's just, a lot.
Yeah. And I didn't even meet you through your piano playing. I actually met you through your wife, who we talked about. I connected with her through an online COVID times variety show or talent show, and then you were like an added bonus. It was like the cherry on top. I was like, oh, hey, I'm married to an awesome piano player too. And now you and your wife both do regular shows on the Vaudacity Network, live streams. And yours is called The Pun-Anno Man, because if anybody is not familiar with David and his brilliant wit and personality, he loves his puns. Both David and Craig that you see on the screen here.
Oh, yes.
They just go back and forth with their puns.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great time. So every other Tuesday night on the Vaudacity Network, he does a full show with classical piano and lots of punny jokes. And what I love about your show is that it's basically, like I tell people, it's like a history of music class and a show at the same time, before you go into and play a piece, you tell everybody all about it, the history, and even like what goes into the composition. And it just feels like we're in a concert and class at the same time. And I just got to say, you do that so well, and it'll suck in the listener, and you want to learn more, and you want to, and it just gives you that much more appreciation for the music and your skill as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and that's really the idea behind it, because, a lot of people, maybe they don't especially love classical music, they don't dislike it particularly, but I think if you know what goes into it, and you know what to listen for, these are all, a lot of the stuff that I talk about on my show is all stuff that people knew to listen for back in the day. Back then, that was modern music. That was It was and is high art, and people were a lot more familiar with it than they are now. And so I think it's kind of like if you were to go watch an opera from the 19th century or 18th century, or one of Shakespeare's plays. You need some context. There's references, there's things in there that you're not going to get as a modern audience because we don't live 200 years ago. We live now, and obviously things have changed a bit. So, I think it gave me such a much bigger appreciation for music once I started actually learning about it, learning the theory, learning what went into it. I had only the vaguest idea of what made a piano sonata a sonata form piece of music prior to taking music classes. And I tried when I was in between high school and college to write my own sonata, not having any real idea what was supposed to go into it. And it was okay. It was extremely repetitive, and it lacked a number of things that sonatas are supposed to have. Things are supposed to happen, or happen a certain way. It didn't have that because I just didn't know. And I think probably 15, 20 years later, I actually rewrote that piece of music, and because I thought, I've got some good ideas in here, but let's actually make a real sonata out of it now that I know what one is. So I think giving my viewers that same kind of background as much as possible within the course of a 2-hour show, can really heighten the listener's experience.
Absolutely. And I'd like to think it's probably a lot like anyone who's writing anything. When you first start out, you think, hey, I'm doing great. But I'm a self-taught screenwriter, and I remember the book that had the biggest influence on me said the writer kept saying, write your first screenplay and throw it away, and then start on your next one. And I'd be like, no, I love this. I'm working so hard on it. Why would I throw it away? But now, like, in retrospect, I totally get it, because after you've done it at least once, then you start to understand and appreciate how everything works. I think it's probably the same with writing novels and sonnets and music as well.
Yeah, just about very few people really hit it the first time out of the gate. That's pretty rare.
You mentioned your show and everything. Emily Thatcher in our chat says, I have much more appreciation now of classical piano music thanks to David.
Well, thank you, Emily. It's such a sweet thing to say, and I'm very glad too, because it, if there's one thing I like to do, it's to talk, especially about things that I know about. But I'm glad that it's helping other people gain an appreciation for something that has been a huge part of my life ever since I was in high school and college.
Yeah. Well, when I asked David to come be a guest on the show, I asked him to bring a couple of his favorite pieces, and we'll talk about what he will do a little bit later in the show, and that is his famous now on Facebook improvisations. We get to enjoy one of those this evening, but before we put the cart behind the horse, let's talk about a couple of your favorite tunes. What piece did you bring to launch the episode this evening?
Tickle our listeners' ears. So the first one is a piece by Franz Schubert. It's one of my all-time favorite composers. Goes for a lot of people, I think. And to kind of put this in context, to put Schubert in context, Paul, you played a song by The Doors a little bit ago. From our time period here in 2023 back to when The Doors were active and performing and writing songs, it's about the same amount of time as between Schubert and Mozart.
Wow.
So, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 years. And the particular piece that I chose is one of his Moments Musicaux. He wrote 6 pieces with that title. Schubert lived to the ripe old age of 31, and he probably left behind more unfinished and unpublished pieces than most composers have complete pieces. He just, apparently in 1815 alone, he wrote 140 songs, a number of orchestral works, a number of large, church and choir works at the age of 17. So this particular piece is one that I started playing, I think, when I was in college, actually. Published as Opus 94 in 1828 or 29. And this is number 2 out of that set. So as was very common, especially in this time period, each individual piece does not have its own title. Just that the set collectively is known as Moments Musicaux.
Gotcha. Well, we can't wait to hear it. Without further
All right.
ado, ladies and gentlemen, David Benjamin with Franz Schubert's Maman Musicaux number 2 from Opus 94. gorgeous.
Thank you. But, yeah, that is one of my very favorite pieces by Schubert. It's the outer sections, or the first section, the middle, and then the ending section. Obviously, they all sound very similar. It's just got this stately elegance to it, and which to me harkens back a bit to the more classical time period. You know, Mozart is a little bit more of that, and then you have these two passionate outbursts in the middle that kind of come out of nowhere, and then fade back into what he started with.
And given the opportunity to just bring two actual written works to the table this evening, what was the second one you chose?
Well, I went around and around a lot today on what to do. Looked at a lot of different things, and you know, I want to do something of my own.
Okay.
Yeah, one of my own pieces. I've written a number of piano pieces, very much in mostly as I've differentiated, mostly the romantic style. Some sound a little bit more modern, some not. This is a piece I wrote in 2016, so it was about 7 years ago. And it's one of a set of three that can go together, or they can each be played independently. I kind of did that on purpose. I talked about sonata form a little while ago. This is a sonata form piece, and it's one of my favorites of my own compositions. I titled it, as it's out of a set called Preludes. It's very much the longest out of the set. They're all relatively short pieces. This is number 9 in C minor, very inventively titled, if I say so.
Ladies and gentlemen, we get the treat of hearing David Benjamin will perform his own original, written in 2016. This is Sonata number 9 in C minor.
Beautiful.
Absolutely phenomenal. Mind blown. Where everybody's saying it in the live chat. Like, oh my gosh. Just how you can A, play something like that, but B, write something like that. That's just it's something that my brain doesn't understand.
It is a lot of work. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I improvise so much, because it's a lot easier than writing it down.
Well, that was amazing, dude.
Thank you.
And thank you for performing your Prelude Number 9 in C minor right here on our show.
Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned your improvisations, and I can't wait to chat about that for a minute. But before we do, we love to include on this podcast poetry as well as the music. We're trying to keep the written word alive as well, and nobody brings and finds and hunts down the best poems for each episode like producer Craig Jackman does. Producer Craig, did you find something that kind of fits this theme?
Actually, I did, and it was kind of interesting because it uses what is considered the term, according to libguides.ferrum.edu, classical poetry. Works that tended towards logic, rationality, and restraint, as opposed to freeform work or more experimental types of writing. I looked through and I found a modern poem that fits this classicism style and wanted to share that with our audience today. It's a really nice little poem called Nothing Can Dim the Light Which Shines from Within, and it's by Matt Starking. No matter what the world may bring, no matter how the winds may sting, there is a light that burns within, a flame that never will rescind. It shines so bright it fills the air, a beacon to guide those in despair. It sparkles like a diamond in the night, a luminescence, oh so bright. It cannot be dimmed by fear or pain. It cannot be snuffed by doubts or shame, for it's a part of who we are, a radiant beauty, like a star. It's there for us when we're afraid, to light a path when we've lost our way. It's always present, always true, a reminder that we are too. So don't let the darkness cloud your view. Don't let the storms persuade you. For nothing can dim the light that's inside. It will always, always, always abide.
Like the dude abides. And Craig Slade, as always. Great find, great interpretation. Of Nothing Can Dim the Light Which Shines from Within by Matt Starking.
Yeah. And it is that classical or classicism that, talks about, which is, even though it is a modern style. And, David, when we think of like modern classical, people like Leonard Bernstein, to me is the first one that comes to my mind as a recent modern classical piece. And then of course some of the conductors, some of the in the symphonies, like John Williams could be considered classical, even though it's more of a pop art, right?
John Williams is very jazz influenced, actually. Very, very strong jazz influence in his music, but also very, very strong classical influence. And he's one of those rare composers who somehow manages to fuse everything together in very new and original ways. And it's just brilliant.
What a journey music takes us on, and music has taken over the years and its history. And it's just so fun to hear you talk all about it on your show, The Piano Man, on the Vaudacity Network. And it's also fun to hear you improvise. And for your final piece this evening, you've agreed to improvise a tune. What is your process when you improvise a piano piece?
Well, for a long time, I didn't really think I had one. I thought I just kind of sat down and started plunking out notes and tried to work that into some kind of recognizable theme, and that was about all there was to it. I think of improvising very much as thinking with my fingers. It's kind of just like I'm talking now. I'm doing that instead with my fingers on the keyboard and presenting music to you that hopefully tells some kind of story. What that is going to be different for everybody.
So if I say something like David Benjamin right now on this podcast, will you improvise a song for us? What happens in your head?
Usually I'll try and think of a key in which to play first. That would be almost analogous maybe to if you're choosing to write a book, the language you would choose in which to write it. Obviously, there's lots of different keys, 24 of them if you want to count major and minor keys. So kind of whatever I feel most comfortable with. And I tend to be very chord-based when I'm improvising. I'm thinking about chord progressions and what sounds good, and then maybe melody lines a little bit secondary to that as I'm moving through it. But otherwise, I'm not sure that there's a lot of higher conscious level thought going on once my hands hit the keyboard. I'm just I don't know, stuff just sort of coming out. I'm not sure how to explain it.
All right. Well, would you mind playing one for us?
I sure will. Do either of you have a request for a key in which I might begin?
Okay. How about G sharp?
All right. Also known as A flat for those enharmonic lovers out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, improvising live on COVE Podcast, David Benjamin with his very own improvisation in A flat major. buckets, all the shoes, man. All the shoes. That was incredible.
Wait a minute, that was improv?
Yeah. It was absolutely made up as I was going, including some, especially for me, very unexpected key changes, which is something that happens sometimes when you're improvising. And the trick is to make it sound like you did it on purpose.
You have a gift, man. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Absolutely, anytime.
I'd like to say thank you very much to David Benjamin for sharing his time, talent, skill, and knowledge with us on this episode. I also want to give a big shout out to Nicole V16 for leaving us a 5-star rating and a very nice review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, Nicole. If anybody out there is listening on the Apple Podcast platform, if you would take a quick moment to leave a rating or a review, I would be so very grateful, and I'll give you a thank you shout out at the end of a future episode. And finally, I am thrilled to say welcome to our newest COVE Patreon curator, Jamie Carganilla. I know her! Thank you, Jamie. I love you. And the production of this show literally wouldn't be possible without you and your support. And if anybody out there hasn't yet visited our Patreon, I urge you to please hop over to patreon.com/COVE podcast. Check out all the great ways you can support the show by joining the COVE community there on Patreon. Have a great week, everyone.
I put the coat on her.